betrayal doesn't begin with a scream. It starts quietly, with a glance too long, a smile too soft, a silence that lasts 1 second more than it should. For Ted, the moment of discovery was not a violent explosion, but a slow implosion of everything he once believed in. This is not a story about love lost, but about the corrosive aftermath of trust undone, how a man, broken by deceit, becomes the very darkness he seeks to destroy. What follows is a descent into the quiet madness of vengeance, where every heartbeat echoes with rage, every breath tastes of guilt, and every victory leaves another scar on the soul. The night Ted discovered the truth was not one of thunder or chaos. It was disturbingly still, the kind of stillness that feels deliberate, as if the universe itself was holding its breath before watching a man's world collapse. Through the rain-streaked window of his car, he saw it, the reflection of betrayal made flesh. Nicole, his wife, her silhouette tangled in the dim light of a stranger's bedroom. But not a stranger, Carlton. His friend. His brother in every way but blood. For a long moment, Ted couldn't breathe. The world around him blurred, every sound muffled by the pounding in his chest. There was no screaming, no confrontation, no violence. Only silence. And in that silence, something inside him cracked, quietly, irrevocably. He sat there for hours, hands trembling on the steering wheel, the rain hammering the windshield like a cruel rhythm. He didn't move. He didn't cry. His face was carved in stone, but his mind spun in fragments. Every memory, every promise, every shared dream was suddenly poisoned. He thought of their wedding day, her smile, the way Carlton had stood beside him as his best man. The irony now made his stomach twist. That same hand that had once clasped his in loyalty had been holding his wife in deceit. Days passed, but time lost its meaning. Ted moved through the world like a ghost, performing the mechanical gestures of life, shaving, driving, pretending to eat, pretending to work. But the world had lost its color. The air felt heavy, and every sound scraped against his nerves. He could still smell Nicole's perfume on the sheets, still hear her voice asking if he'd be late for dinner, still feel the phantom weight of her head resting on his shoulder. Yet every familiar thing had turned foreign. He could not look at her without seeing Carlton's hands on her skin. The confirmation came not from her confession, but from a cruel accident of fate, a paper left inside a drawer, a genetic test report marked with names he could not unsee. The child, the one he had held in his arms, whispered lullabies to in the dark, the child whose eyes he thought mirrored his own, was not his. It was Carlton's. The words on the page were sterile, clinical, merciless. They did not tremble. But Ted's world did. In that instant, something in him died, and something else took its place, cold, patient, methodical. He did not scream or shatter furniture. He simply sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall for hours, feeling the weight of every second pressing down on him like stones. It was as if his soul had been emptied out, leaving only the echo of a man. Anger, when it came, did not explode. It seeped. It grew like mold, slowly consuming what little humanity was left. He began to study her every movement, the way she avoided his eyes, the subtle pauses in her sentences, the moments she left the room to answer her phone. Every detail became evidence, every silence an accusation. And through it all, she smiled, believing he knew nothing. That smile was what drove him mad. He no longer slept. Nights became endless hours of staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of the woman beside him, wondering how she could sleep so easily while his mind screamed. The clock ticked louder with each passing second, mocking him. Sometimes he would get up, wander the darkened house, and stand by the child's door. He would watch the gentle rise and fall of the little chest, torn between love and disgust, between the instinct to protect and the urge to destroy everything that bore Carlton's shadow. Ted started collecting things, fragments of truth, proof of deceit. He became an investigator in his own home, tracing financial records, phone calls, hidden transactions. What he uncovered twisted the knife deeper. Carlton had been siphoning money from their shared business for years, hiding behind Ted's reputation. Nicole had helped him. Every spreadsheet, every transfer, every falsified signature was another betrayal disguised as trust. It wasn't just infidelity, it was orchestration. A plan. A conspiracy dressed in affection. Ted realized that his marriage, his friendship, his company, all of it, had been built on lies. He wasn't merely a betrayed husband, he was the fool they'd crafted together. That realization didn't break him. It sharpened him. From that moment, Ted ceased to be a victim. The mask of civility stayed on his face, but underneath, a storm brewed. He smiled when Nicole spoke, nodded when Carlton called, attended dinners, shook hands, and played his role perfectly. He became invisible in plain sight, calm, polite, predictable. And while they relaxed, he watched. He planned. He became the architect of their undoing. He began to manipulate the narrative from behind the scenes. He fed subtle lies into conversations, let rumors trickle into the right ears. Slowly, he painted Carlton as unreliable, careless, deceitful, which, ironically, was true. But truth alone is powerless until it's weaponized. Ted learned to twist it, to time it, to let it bloom into chaos just when they least expected. He set a trap using their own greed. A lucrative investment opportunity, fabricated, flawless, irresistible. Ted created fake documents, false partners, convincing audits. He built a phantom empire so real that even the sharpest mind would see profit where there was only ruin. Carlton, blinded by ambition, walked right into it. Nicole followed. They transferred everything, money, trust, future, into a lie that would collapse on top of them. When the scandal broke, it was catastrophic. The media devoured it. Carlton's reputation shattered overnight, investors withdrew, lawsuits poured in. Nicole tried to contain the damage, but her name was already stained. She found herself cornered, accused, and isolated. The people who once envied her turned away in disgust. Carlton disappeared, fleeing the wreckage he had helped create, leaving her alone to face the storm. Ted watched it all from the sidelines, expressionless. He attended the hearings, listened to her plead innocence, and remained silent. When his testimony was called for, he spoke with perfect calm, presenting evidence so precise it was impossible to refute. His voice carried no tremor. The court believed him. The public praised his composure. And Nicole, the woman who once knew every heartbeat of his, looked at him as if seeing a stranger. But vengeance, once fulfilled, leaves nothing but ashes. When it was over, when the headlines faded, when the world moved on, Ted returned to an empty house. The silence that greeted him was heavier than any scream. He sat in the living room, surrounded by echoes of a life that no longer existed. The family photos still hung on the wall, but the faces looked like strangers. He could not remember what happiness had felt like. At night, he wandered through the rooms, tracing his fingers over furniture, over memories fossilized in dust. He thought about Nicole, not the betrayer, but the woman she once was. The laughter, the shared mornings, the small kindnesses. Those memories hurt more than her lies. Because they reminded him of what he had lost, not to her, but to himself. Sometimes he stood by the child's empty room, staring into the darkness. The toys remained untouched, the scent of innocence lingering faintly in the air. He wondered what that child would think if it ever knew the truth, that it was born from betrayal, raised in illusion, and used as a pawn in vengeance. The thought hollowed him further. Ted realized too late that revenge had not restored his dignity. It had devoured it. The man who once valued honesty and loyalty was gone, replaced by someone cunning, ruthless, unrecognizable. He had become the very thing he hated, deceptive, manipulative, hollow. The difference was that Nicole and Carlton had acted out of desire, but Ted had acted out of pain. And pain, he learned, can be far more monstrous than lust. Months turned into years. People moved on, but Ted remained trapped in the ruins of his own making. He became withdrawn, reclusive, his once promising career reduced to routine survival. The city outside continued to pulse with life, indifferent to his slow decay. On some nights, he would pour himself a drink, stare into the mirror, and search for traces of the man he used to be. But all he could see was a stranger with dead eyes staring back. He often thought about forgiveness, not for Nicole or Carlton, but for himself. Yet forgiveness requires a soul willing to heal, and his was scorched beyond repair. He had thought vengeance would bring clarity, that it would cleanse the wound. But instead, it had deepened it, carved it into something permanent. There was no redemption in what he'd done, only quiet desolation. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Ted sat by the window, watching the light bleed from the sky. The world outside glowed gold for a fleeting moment, then dimmed into gray. The same way his life had once glowed with love before collapsing into shadow. He understood now that betrayal was not the end of love, it was its transformation, the point where devotion becomes poison. In the end, there was no dramatic conclusion, no cathartic redemption. Just a man and his silence. Ted had destroyed the people who destroyed him, but in doing so, he had erased every reason he once had to live. The house creaked softly around him, wind whispering through the cracks. Somewhere, a clock ticked, steady, indifferent, endless. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence swallow him whole. Somewhere deep inside, beyond rage, beyond sorrow, there was a single, unbearable truth. Nicole had betrayed him once. But he had betrayed himself forever. In the end, there was no redemption waiting for Ted, no hand reaching through the darkness, no light breaking the silence he had built around himself. The world moved on, indifferent to the wreckage he left behind. The rain still fell, the seasons still turned, and life outside his crumbling house went on as though his tragedy had never existed. Inside, however, time had stopped. The air hung heavy with the ghosts of laughter, of promises once whispered, of the fragile warmth that had long turned to ash. He would sometimes walk through the empty rooms, touching the walls as if they might remember the man he once was. The faint smell of Nicole's perfume still lingered in corners, mocking him with its persistence. He wondered if ghosts truly existed, or if they were simply the weight of memory refusing to fade. Every reflection reminded him that he had become one himself, a spirit trapped between guilt and vengeance, incapable of rest. The mirror was the cruelest of his companions. In it, he saw not the face of a man avenged, but of a man erased. The eyes that stared back were void of warmth, their light consumed by years of quiet rage. He realized then that the moment he chose to destroy them, he had also destroyed the last fragments of himself worth saving. What he mistook for justice had only been the slow, deliberate suicide of his soul. One morning, as dawn crawled reluctantly across the horizon, Ted stepped outside. The world was still wet with night, wrapped in fog and silence. For the first time in years, he felt the cold air without fear or anger, only a strange calm acceptance. He looked toward the horizon, where the sky began to bleed pale gold, and understood that there would be no absolution, no forgiveness, only the quiet endurance of existing. He closed his eyes and breathed, feeling the weight of the years pressing down like the ocean. There were no tears left to fall. Only the echo of a truth he could never escape, that in seeking to destroy betrayal, he had become its final masterpiece.